Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You have reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig a little bit deeper. It is Monday, July 26, 2021, and you've reached our first sound off of this, our 7th season. Hi, buddy. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts for the show. And yes, every year, the first sound off of the season deals with answers some of the questions that you have from our finale episodes. In this case, the top 10 of 2020, the Oscar preview from 2020, and the 1970 in review. So a lot of this show, which is generally our freeform segment, is going to cover some things that we left off or didn't cover in those shows, or responses to your guys' questions on those shows. But we'll get to that shortly. We've got some other stuff going on as well. First, let me introduce my co-hosts of the evening. One of the newer members and the only current female host on the show, Kelly O'Malley, is here.
Hi.
And for those of you that are unhappy with the long hair that I got going on, you've got Kelly to blame. She was the one that said I should keep growing it out. I listened to her. Most people are fans, but some of you out there in YouTube land are haters about it. And so it is what it is. Is it still okay?
Oh, I love it. Tell the haters to leave.
I don't want them to leave. I want them to subscribe, but still, the majority, I think, are plus the long hair. And also with us, ladies and gentlemen, one of the members of our 1970 in Review show, Matthew Polis, is back with us to help answer some of your questions from 1970 in Review. Matt, you excited?
Very excited.
First, here's the schedule for this, our 65th set of episodes, which started on Thursday, July 15th, with the review of the new Marvel film Black Widow, continued on Monday, July 19th, with our Indie Spotlight, the film Christine from 2016. And this past Thursday, July 22nd, was our classic review of one of our 1970 films that I don't think Matt watched, El Topo from director Alexander Jodorowsky. And tonight, of course, is the sound off, and there you see some of the things that we're going to do on the sound off. We're not going to do the tweet beat yet. We're going to first do a book review. This is kind of fun segment that you guys have seemed to enjoy, in which we review books related to the film industry or one of the years that we studied, etc. So tonight, I've got an interesting book for you. Though we've never done a full review on it, it's come up a few times in conversation, this film, whether it be in the brackets or just a random reference, referring to my second favorite movie of all time. Do either of you know what my second favorite movie of all time from watching the shows?
North by Northwest? Or is that your
North by Northwest? No, it's in the 30s, but it's a decent
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Raiders of the Lost Ark is actually number one all time, but also obviously a very good guess. Number 2 would be Roman Polanski's Chinatown from 1974. And so I was curious and eager to read this newish book on the making of the film called The Big Goodbye, Chinatown, and the Last Years of Hollywood from writer Sam Wasson. Out of all the books I've reviewed in the show, this is by far the best. It paints portraits of the 4 iconoclasts that came together on this project. Roman Polanski, of course, Jack Nicholson, writer Robert Towne, and famed producer and studio head Robert Evans. Nicholson and Towne met in an acting class in the mid-50s over here on Cherimoya, just off of Franklin, where they became fast friends. Also in the same class were Warren Beatty, but also Bob Rafelson and Carol Eastman, who were the director and writer, respectively, of 5 Easy Pieces, one of our 1970 films. All of them were an inseparable group that used to hang out at a bakery called Poopy's, P-U-P-I''S, on the Sunset Strip, and they would dream about making their own movies. Jack's success in a supporting role in Easy Rider in 1969 made him the conduit through which they would achieve that dream. It allowed them to raise the money to make 5 Easy Pieces, which added to Jack's stardom. Robert Towne had done rewrite work on The Godfather in 1972 and had scripted The Last Detail for Jack in 1973, all of which led to his dream project, his 30s-era story about a private detective named J.J. Gittes. I love the idea of the group of friends forging a path in Hollywood and their seemingly infinite loyalty to each other, a group that would add Polanski and Evans to their ranks as Chinatown, the film, evolved from script to production. What I also loved about the book is the way in which it shows how the simplest things that can lead to creative inspiration. How looking into a water shortage from his youth led Towne to discover major government corruption from the 30s that he echoed in the film. How a beauty mark in the eye of his girlfriend, Julie Payne, became a flaw in the iris for the Evelyn Mulray character, one of the lovelier details of the film. How a discussion about a family member of Towne's previous girlfriend, Barry Chase, was either her aunt or her sister led to the film's most iconic exchange. How Robert Evans' divorce from Matt's favorite actress from 1970, Ally McGraw, led to him pushing for more romance in the film to balance some of the cynicism. In doing biographical work on these main creatives involved with the film, writer Wasson discovers all the minute details that became the creative ingredients that went into the pot that became the film. And one rather large one, According to the book, the inescapable cynicism and darkness of Chinatown can be directly tied to the helter-skelter murders of 1969. Not only was the whole city rocked and scared, especially because there were no leads for the first several weeks, but obviously Chinatown's director was married to Sharon Tate, who was pregnant with his child at the time of her brutal execution. Polanski rewrote the ending of Chinatown, which carries with it the helplessness and devastation that hovered over his entire existence in the many years following the murders. The book, I think, unsuccessfully tries to, per the subtitle, make the point that Chinatown was the end of a golden creative era in Hollywood. But I kind of find that to be self-serving and a narrow point of view. Chinatown, though a favorite, obviously, was one of a handful of films born from the fear and mistrust created by Helter Skelter, Vietnam, and Watergate. After Chinatown, Town and Beatty would do Shampoo, while Jack would do One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, both of which you could argue had similar creative roots. One thing that did happen in 1975 was Jaws, which did change the movie business forever, but I don't think it was as much of the antithesis to Chinatown as the book intends. As a matter of fact, I think Jaws itself, I find it to be rather artful for a summer blockbuster kind of movie. It did, however, create the playbook for the movies to follow that would make Hollywood more of a conglomeration and less of a creative place. With that said, the detail of the book is extraordinary and gave me such faith and hope in the creative process, even when it's combative. I wish I had time to share more about the aftermath of Chinatown, how each of the men involved struggled in the new Hollywood and basically fell to pieces personally, each in their own way. But those are stories for another day, or perhaps you can just get the book yourself.
It's on my list of ones I know I should have seen. It's kind of amazing I graduated with a film degree without seeing it.
It'd be interesting if film schools had a checklist of movies you had to see before they handed you a diploma. Can you imagine?
I feel like maybe they should sometimes.
They should.
That might be a topic that a can of worms that it's not the right time to open. All right, so that's our book review, ladies and gentlemen. So it's time to move on to the segment of the show that I think you guys are all waiting for. Our first sound off of every year is usually among our most watched of the sound offs because we always are unpacking a lot of stuff from the finale episodes, the top 10s, Oscar preview, in this case, 1970 in review, a section that we call Tweet Beat, because we're answering questions that you guys have asked us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. The Society responds to viewer questions, mostly on Instagram these days, quite frankly. And so the first thing that comes up every year is the composite top 10. And here's the list. If you merged the 3 top 10 lists, me, Jim, and Devin, this is the list of films and how it would rank, with the father ranking there at number 1 because it was both high on Jim and Devin's list. Nothing from my top 10 list is actually in the first 3 here. But in fairness, 5 films on my top 10 were films that neither Jim or Devin had seen. Jim and Devin had 6 films cross over on each other's list, which is an all-time record. I had 2 crossovers with Jim and 1 with Devin. No film appeared on all 3 lists. There are 5 Best Picture nominees on this composite top 10, including the winner there in at number 3. Anything that you guys want to say on this composite top 10 list?
I'm really happy to see Palm Springs is on the list because for me, it was one of the most fun and compelling movies.
Matty P, I know you spent most of the year watching 1970 films. Anything on this composite top 10 strike you?
Well, having seen you guys talk about it, the ones that rise to the top, because yes, I haven't seen very many of these because of the 70s deluge. I would like to watch Promising Young Woman, and I'm thinking of Ending Things next. I've seen. Well,
you have to come back in the show and let us know what you thought about them. All right, guys. So this is the other thing that comes up, and this confused Matty last year. So hopefully I can explain it better. This is our composite top 10 from all the years that we've done the show. We started the show in 2015. And so if you take all the top 10s that we did from 2015 through 2020, whether it be Davey from 2015 and 2016 or Devin from 2017 and 2020, all the top 10s, and you merge them all together, this is what the list would be. Matt, now that this is your second year, does this make more sense now to you?
Yeah.
The same concept where we apply points to number 10, number 9, and so forth and so on. 10 gets 10 points. It's the highest point scorers over the years. Phantom Thread is the only film ever to appear on more than 2 lists. It appeared on 3 lists in 2017, and that's why it's number 1 on this composite top 10 of the show's history anyway. 2 2020 films join this list, knocking off The Florida Project and The Favorite. Last year, 2019, became the most represented year in this list, and it remains so, with 1917, Honey Boy, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood all still on. Widows is the only one of my number 1 films to make this list. This list features 1 Best Picture winner and 5 Best Picture nominees. I hate one of these films and dislike two others, and I make that point just so you know that this is not weighted towards me in any particular way. Silence, 1917, Creed, Widows, and Honey Boy were only seen by two of the three members on the panels those years, so theoretically they might have been even higher had all three people seen it in the year that we did those top 10s. This is the composite top 10 for the life of the show, 2015 through 2020. Any comments on this? It's Matt, you're on last year's show where we did this, so it's a little different from last year, but not too much. And Kelly's probably your first time seeing this. What do you guys think?
I like it. I like seeing a list like this to inspire new viewing.
People are always stopping me on the street and asking me for film recommendations. Any film on this list, even though I don't love them all, obviously several people did. So any film on this list is worthwhile to look at.
It's just that I've only seen 3 of them. I feel like I need to do some watching.
Which 3 have you seen?
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, multiple times. Crip Camp, and 1917.
No Phantom Thread for you, huh?
I'm working up to it.
Any Phantom Thread comments?
He's one of my favorite directors. I'm glad it's on there. It's not my favorite film of his, but I love that it's number 1.
All right, guys, so the next thing is you always ask me, because I always talk on the show how I vote on the Indie Spirit Awards. So you guys always ask me what I voted for. So here I publish every year the votes that I turned in for the Indie Spirit Awards. Now, it's not always some of my favorite films. It's just based on the nominees. You know, there you can see I have Best Picture, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, which didn't make my top 10, but it was the best of the 5 nominees that they nominated. I liked the film, but I didn't love it, and it didn't make my top 10, like I said. Not thrilled with all 5 of their nominees for Best Picture. I also wanted to point out that Lapsus on this list, which was my choice for first screenplay, was not eligible for this year's Oscars, and thus not eligible for our top 10 list. I think it would have made mine if it were, and it might be eligible for 2021 Oscars. There's a little preview if it does turn out being eligible, depending on its upcoming release strategy. So, guys, you had a chance to glance through. I didn't go through each winner. What do you guys think of my Indie Spirit Award votes?
I don't know what 9 Days is.
It was my number 1 film of the year.
I apologize.
5 of those categories that I voted for did turn out to be winners. Crip Camp won Best Documentary. Quo Vadis Aida won International Film. Nomadland won Best Cinematography. I had Riz Ahmed, Best Actor. He won in that category there. And Best Screenplay, Promising Young Woman, that one there as well. So 5 of the things I voted for won this year's Spirit Awards. I always like a little more, but it is what it is. That sort of sums up our top 10 stuff. We're going to talk about the Oscar preview, and we're going to sort of test how we did as predictors. In 2019, I got 7 for 9 right. In 2018, I got 5 for 9 right. In 2017, I went 9 for 9. And in 2016, 8 for 9, only missing Best Picture in that Moonlight La La Land fiasco situation. On our main show this year, Patrick went 3 for 9, Alex went 5 for 9, and I went 4 for 9. For the first time ever, someone beat me. For the first time ever, I finished below 500, 50%. And for the first time ever, someone beat me in the predictions. And it was the least likely person, I feel. Incidentally, Alex also won the trivia contest that we broadcast earlier this year on Oscar Sunday, which is interesting because he also doesn't usually do well at those either.
He studied.
Yeah, he did his homework. Everyone on the show missed adapted screenplay and actor. The father wound up winning adapted screenplay. And, of course, the big surprise of the night was Anthony Hopkins winning Best Actor that none of us predicted, although I did say that he should have won. The key ones that I missed that I probably should have had: cinematography, actress, which I said on the show was super close, and picture, which I admitted that I was gambling when I said I thought Chicago 7 was going to, due to the preferential voting system, Best Picture has been really hard to predict. So this year I did reverse psychology thinking I would get it, and I failed again. I also did a lightning round of the craft categories as I usually do. I was 7 of 8 last year, only 5 of 8 this year, for a total of 9 of 17, which is by far my worst ever in terms of predictions. And so I'm embarrassed. And I know that you guys, as my friends, are ashamed of me because you guys come to me for Oscar pool info. And I did really bad this year.
I'm just really disappointed and don't know if I can trust you.
I don't know that I can trust me anymore.
Yeah.
Do you guys have anything you want to say about this year's Oscars?
Well, so these are predictions specifically as opposed to you telling a list of your favorites. I'd be curious to know when you pick your favorites of the same movies, and then you predict the ones you think will actually win. Is there any crossover selections?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think The Father is one example where I said that Chadwick Boseman will win because I thought it would be the posthumous award. And I said that Anthony Hopkins should win for The Father. With all the issues I had with the film, I thought the performance was extraordinary. And he did win. So in that case, that was a category where I wanted one instead of what I predicted. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right, so now I'm going to turn things over to you guys. Our last question for 2020, because neither of you were on either the Oscar preview or the top 10. I'm going to ask you if you guys have one favorite film from 2020 that you want to share, because you guys didn't get to opine on that. Kelly, is it Palm Springs, or do you have another film that you'd like to talk about?
I think Palm Springs.
All right, so also on my top 10 and Jim's top 10 did not make your boyfriend's top 10.
Palm Springs and My Octopus Teacher.
Right. On the top 10 of 2020, Devin talked at length about your reaction to The Octopus Teachers, the famous break for emotional content.
That was private.
You'll have to talk to Devin about that. He made it public. Matty P, favorite film of 2020?
It's not my favorite movie, but it made me very happy to watch Tenet.
Wow. That came up in the Oscar preview because Patrick said it should have been nominated for Best Cinematography.
It's not his best movie. It was one of the movies during the pandemic that I sat down and watched in this room here. The first one, it was like a big movie moment for me because I hadn't been to movies in a long time, reserved the whole night without any interruptions, and it made me very happy. So it's a good memory of a movie from last year, even though it's not my favorite movie.
Is this the part where I tell you how much I don't like the movie, or should we just skip that part?
I don't care if you don't like it. I don't love it either. I'm saying it was a fond memory of the year.
And I appreciate that, the movie-going experience. The first movie I saw in the theater was The Marksman, which, as terrible as that movie was, it was definitely a pleasure to be back in movie theaters. All right, Matt, it's time to turn 1970. You ready?
Oh, we haven't started yet.
No, it's time to answer people's questions related to the 1970 in review. And you can see the little number goes from 93 to 43 there in terms of the Oscars. The 1970 Oscars were the 43rd annual Oscars, and those are the ones we talked about in the 1970 in review. So, series of questions here that we get a lot whenever we do these. And Kelly can answer this one too because she watched a portion of the 1970 in review. The question is, what is the favorite factoid or tidbit that you guys remember the most from the 1970 in review? The favorite JB factoid or tidbit that I mentioned on the show. A lot of the tidbits are in the beginning, so Kelly saw a lot of the beginning. But so yeah, is there one thing that stands out that you guys remember? Anybody can start this.
Oh man,
is this where I bring up Sherlock Holmes?
If you choose to make this the time, you can do that.
What stood out to me was JB's interpretation of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's writing and character development as an author when he was discussing The Secret Life of Sherlock Holmes.
It's the private life of Sherlock Holmes, but yes.
Pardon me. I haven't seen it, so I'm not obligated to know the title.
But what did I say? I don't remember what I said.
You were talking about how the private life of Sherlock Holmes delves deeper into the character and gives you more of a character than the inferior writing of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
I definitely never would have said the word inferior. Definitely.
You didn't say it. But what you did say was that he doesn't really develop the characters very well. And I just so wholeheartedly disagree with you.
If I said that exact phrase, then I disagree with that too. But I mean, what I meant to say, if I didn't, I apologize. That I do feel like that the screenplay, which of a film that you haven't seen, so be careful to argue with it. The screenplay brings out a little more of each of the main characters, Watson, and particularly Sherlock Holmes, and a lot of the side characters, where a lot of the Holmesian stories, which I love, I just want to be, and I think I said that too, can be very plot heavy at times. Billy Wilder and I.A.L. Diamond, through this lens of this movie, explore some of the nooks and crannies for film characterization. What Arthur Conan Doyle does in the books works perfectly for the books, but on screen, most film adaptations of Sherlock Holmes are really dry. And that's not about Doyle, that's about the adaptation. What I thought was special about particularly the screenplay of Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, which is where I singled it out, is that this was not. The character was more full of life in this screen incarnation than a lot of other ones. I know Devin likes the Guy Ritchie ones. I think that's a little too flashy and jazzy for my taste. The fallibility of the character is more interesting to me in this version. Matt, you saw Private Life of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, it was a little zany, actually, for me, I think.
Zany.
Well, I'm
not as zany as the Guy Ritchie ones.
Different kind of zany.
I guess that's not crazy. But Kelly, do you have a rebuttal, I presume?
No, I'm happy to hear you clear that up. It wasn't clear.
No, I love Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yeah,
and I think what he does is really good for that. But I mean, like on screen, I feel like, this feels like a different on-screen version of Sherlock than I've seen. Matty, it's your turn for a tidbit. What do you remember from the 1970 show?
It's not a tidbit per se, it's not a bullet point, but I enjoyed our discussion about the different Oscar categories and how in one case with Love Story, it was a book and then a thing and the movie, in which category is it original or not? And then on the acting side, we had Gene Hackman for the supporting actor when clearly he was a lead, and the dad character got the lead actor, and we were all frustrated by that. So it was I like discussion about these categories and how they're kind of loose and fuzzy. It doesn't always make sense.
For the audience, in the case of Love Story, it started out as an original screenplay, and then to raise awareness for it, they novelized it. But the Academy recognized it as an original screenplay, even though the book came out before the movie. It was one of the more gray areas in history, because the same thing kind of happened with Dances with Wolves in 1990, but that they recognized as an adapted screenplay.
In the case of Dances with Wolves, it was prior, but they didn't consider it that way.
Michael Blake wrote a screenplay that he brought to Kevin Costner, and Kevin Costner was like, turn it into a book so that people are aware of it, and then we'll make the movie. And it was a successful book, and then they made the movie. But technically, it had the same trajectory as Love Story. I think less people knew the backstory behind it, whereas they knew the backstory behind Love Story. It was sort of known. Now, one of the more fun little questions here that Matt alluded that he was not as prepared for as he had hoped. The audience wants to know, who was the hottest man and woman you saw in films from 1970? Best looking as far as you're concerned. Let us start with man. Hottest man from 1970.
Frank Langella.
Ooh. I had a feeling you were going to go there. What I like about that pick is he's tall and lanky and awkward in 1970. And of course, he was in two films from 1970, The 12 Chairs. He shows a little more chest hair. And Diary of a Mad Housewife, where I guess he's shirtless in that film a lot too. So I can see where you're going with that. I personally don't feel much for Frank Langella, who was also in a movie from 2020 as well, obviously. So
The Trials.
Chicago 7, yes. Do you still think he's hot, Matty?
Not his chest hair or his lanky arms, Jonathan. It's his attitude and his charisma and his confidence.
You get behind the confidence, but he's almost like he's kind of a jerk in both films, don't you think?
They're totally different movies, 12 Chairs and the other one, but I don't know, there's something about him that just kind of has a little bit of like a Ryan Gosling. Not that they're the same, but like no matter what he does, they're like confident and like.
I never in my life thought I would hear Frank Langella compared to Ryan Gosling. Never.
I said they're not the same, but I said they both have the same confidence across their roles. They can kind of pull anything off.
Frank Langella relies a little more on dialogue than Gosling's like the strong silent type in a lot of his movies. Langella is very loquacious in his roles. Kelly, anything on Frank Langella?
I saw him in Frost Nixon, and he is dreamy.
For my hottest male actor, I'm going to go to the movie that we talked about probably the most in our 1970 in review, Christopher Jones, the brooding lover suffering from PTSD and Ryan's daughter. It's a smallish role, but it's a key role. He winds up being the other man in that sort of love triangle. He, to me, is more Ryan Gosling in the sense that he doesn't say much at all, but he's brooding the way that Ryan Gosling was in Drive kind of thing. And it's as if, Kelly, that we've decided that Ryan Gosling is the measuring stick with which we compare attractive men to. Zach, I know, liked his performance a lot in the film, although I don't think it came up on the show. Kelly, I suppose you don't know Christopher Jones.
I'm sorry, Christopher.
Matty P, you barely remember Ryan's daughter, as I recall.
It wasn't that I barely remember it. It's that for the show, I tried to watch it more than one time, and I couldn't make it through. But based on the show, I told myself I'd watch it, give it another chance, which I have done, and I still haven't made it through. So I don't know what it is with that movie, but I can't make it through.
Because of its length?
No, because I don't even make it far enough to give that as an issue. I mean, it looks beautiful, but I don't get into it. I can't.
That'll bring us back to Matty P to tell us who he thought was the hottest woman in a film from 1970.
I don't have a lot to say about it. I'm going to say Lee Grant.
Interesting. She's a little older. She's got the milfy thing going on in The Landlord. What's cool about Lee Grant historically, she looks so different from movie to movie. Like early in her career, she was the weird, awkward girl in a film like Detective Story. She was not the pretty one at all. She's a rich socialite in The Landlord, and she gets really done up. And yeah, she's definitely attractive. And she's like a chameleon in the way she changes from role to role like that. Kelly, do you know Lee Grant? She won an Oscar in 1975 for Shampoo. She's a great actress and director.
I don't know her, but she seems lovely.
So yeah, Matt, you went a little old. We were a lot older than me, and maybe that says something about me. But I take my women cues from Devin.
What?
My hottest woman of 1970 is Jennifer O'Neill in Rio Lobo, the Western with John Wayne. She is laughably bad in the movie as an actor and ridiculously too young for John Wayne, but stunning to look at. It's not a good movie, so basically it was the only thing I could pay attention to. O'Neill's career didn't have the success that they expected it would after casting her in Rio Lobo, but she did have some success in the early 80s as a hot war widow who has an affair with a boy that has a crush on her in the famous film Summer of 42. Even as an older woman, she looked pretty amazing in that film as well. Has anybody seen Summer of 42? Mm-hmm. Matt, did you see Rio Lobo for the project, or is that one of the Westerns you skipped?
The Hornet's Nest in the beginning?
Yes!
Okay, so I saw it, I guess. Good job, Jonathan.
She's attractive, right?
Yeah, it's great.
It's great. So that's that question. Now, Matt Polis has been looking forward to this question for months. Literally ever since we did the 1970 review, because all he wanted to talk about was his anti-picks. So first question, before we get to expand upon the anti-picks, Matt Polis, the audience wants to know, what was your least favorite film from 1970?
Scrooged.
Wow. Okay.
I know you liked it. You liked it a decent amount.
I'm middle of the way. I don't think it's a good movie. What I loved about the movie are the craft elements. I mentioned it several times over the course of the 1970 review. I had it winning Best Cinematography. I had it nominated in the production design. It is not great. I don't love Albert Finney in the film. He's an all-time great actor, but he really overdoes Scrooge. His hunch, his voice, his gait, even his makeup are all too much. And the songs I thought were weak, except for that one song I thought was good. And that's the one that was nominated for an Oscar. And I thought that was actually a fun little song called Thank You Very Much. And that was one of the better scenes in the film. Visually, in terms of cinematography, production design, costume design, I thought it was exceptional. I love those sets built from scratch like that, the way they built London on a soundstage like that, Dickensian London in particular. I thought they did a great job with the way they used color, the way the costumes design and cinematography played off each other in terms of color, and the framing I thought was outstanding. Some of the numbers had a lot of entropy in terms of the choreography, but the performances, even Albert Finney, are kind of weak. There's a lot of bad things about Scrooge. It's middle of the road for me. I would not call it the worst of the year. I mean, I saw 100 and now 101 films from 1970, and it would probably be in the 70 range. I didn't go far in ranking them, but it would not be towards the top. So I'm not mad at you, but it is interesting because I talked about it so much on the 1970 in review. I don't suppose you've watched Scrooge with Albert Finney, Kelly?
I have. I've seen many versions, but it's definitely one I recognize some of the skills from. It's been a while. I don't think it's one that I really liked. I always liked the cartoon version and the Muppet version the best.
My favorite version. If we're gonna play this, we should probably play it at Christmas. Is, speaking of 1970, the George C. Scott version, and I love the Muppet version and the Disney version as well. But in terms of live action versions, even though he's not British, George C. Scott is the best Scrooge I've ever seen. It was from 1982 or 3, maybe? George C. Scott, of course, won Best Actor in 1970 for Patton, played Scrooge in the early 80s, and I thought he was outstanding. Has nobody seen that particular version?
I'd have to look at it to know.
Well, we won't go down that rabbit hole, but you brought it up.
Let's do a show about it.
In episode 21.4, we did count down our top 5 Christmas movies of all time, and I mentioned it, but I also mentioned Muppets Christmas Carol as well as on my top 5 Christmas movies of all time. Anything else on Scrooge?
No, just that I don't share your appreciation of the visuals. It was mostly that. Well, the acting was hard to swallow too, but it was so much of a set. Like you said, it's theatrical, or it looks like it's on sets, and it looks totally contrived. If you're looking for a theatrical aesthetic, then you might enjoy it, but I wasn't looking for that, and I generally don't in movies, and so I did not like it. Well,
I mean, I'm sort of judging in its own terms, because it's not like it was trying to present a world of verisimilitude. It made a choice to present a heightened world, and it was consistent within that world. So, I mean, I see your point, but it wasn't aiming to be realistic. It was going for that sort of big budget musical kind of heightened tone.
I was thinking about how you said verisimilitude and everyone should take a drink.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, she's right. Verisimilitude.
And I was out. I'm sorry.
You got to be ready. I can bust out verisimilitude at any time. You got to be ready. All right, so it's Matty. You also had, throughout the show, you insinuated or intimated that you had anti-picks, and I kept saying, no, we got to move on. The show is about the best, not the worst. So, but now's your time. Are there, within reason, like I don't want to spend all night on it, but do you have a few anti-picks that you want to call out here?
Well, all right. So the winner of cinematography was Ryan's daughter. My anti-pick, for some small reasons, was Diary of a Mad Housewife for the super awkward Kiss Cam 2000. Do you remember that, like, close-up mouth kiss thing?
Yeah.
Horrible. Also, the anti-pick was Women in Love because they invented the TikTok Snapchat shot with the vertical bars in the building that framed the shot like an iPhone. They didn't know it at the time, but that would become the standard horrible portrait shot. I didn't appreciate that.
Wow. Women in Love and that was nominated, I think.
It was nominated. I also liked it a lot, and you hated it. Anti-Pick is Darker Than Amber for visual effects.
Wow.
Because of the, it rips off James Bond with those little circles, but it looks like two flashlights kind of bouncing around the frame.
It was a very low-budget film. I feel like you're kicking them while they're down.
Well, I don't know. My anti-pick for screenplay was Tora, which is otherwise respected movie.
Yeah. The screenplay is very dry and historically based, and there's no character development at all. It's hard to argue with. It's almost like a docudrama. And what I said, I don't remember if it was on the show or to Zach afterwards. It does really well with the docu, not so good with the drama.
Yeah, it didn't seem like the level of dialogue was up to what they were actually talking about. So I know Carrie Snodgrass in Diary of a Housewife is respected actress in a role for her, but I liked other parts of that movie a lot, but she was kind of dry to me when I watched it. After talking about it with you, I think I started to like her more, but I had her as my anti-pick because she was on the actual nomination list, and I was like, I didn't want her to be on there. I don't hate it, I just was surprised she was nominated for best.
So my response to that is I actually had her 6, so I didn't have her in my top 5 either. I didn't have her nominated, but I did think she was quite good. I was most taken with her consistently raw vulnerability underneath the fully suppressed rage. Her character wasn't always fair, but Snodgrass made all her moments believable and effective. Her big, deep eyes convey a great deal of conflict and thought to us, but not overtly so that anyone in the diegesis would see. I think she did a lot of nice cinematic things with that performance.
It was good. And when I looked at the film again for a review at some point, I remember remembering the scenes a lot more fondly than I at the time. But anyway, I liked her husband a lot, and I know you didn't, but I liked him in that movie.
Yeah, I think the men were not as strong. Are those all your anti-picks? Are we good?
Yeah.
So my worst film of the year, ladies and gentlemen. So when Zach brought up Two Mules for Sister Sarah on the show, I mentioned that it wasn't the only film from 1970 to feature a nun and cowboy traveling cross-country together. The other one is my worst film of 1970. And ladies and gentlemen, here it is. It is the film Madrone, starring Richard Boone and Leslie Caron of Gigi fame. Nearly every element of the film is poorly executed, starting with the acting. Boone playing unsophisticated is awkward at best. Caron is stunning, but plays piousness to the point of irritation until, of course, it suddenly disappears. The scene work is stilted and unnatural. The action scenes, if you want to call them that, are sloppy and feature no sense of geography. And perhaps all that could have been forgiven if the story had any value whatsoever. The conflicts in the film are either forced or half-baked. There is no real sense of threat or danger or any real understanding over who or what might be chasing them or why. At one point, Madrone starts to explain, but dances around it in a vague way, as if they didn't want to come up with a motivation, so they just left it up to us, hoping we'd fill in the blanks for them. Lazy writing, if you ask me. I think the filmmakers wanted Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, but Boone and Caron had not even a tenth of the chemistry that Deborah Kerr and Robert Mitchum have in that film. So they needed that to be the foundation of the film, and it just wasn't there. This film had no energy and no life, and therefore no interest for me. Madrone is my worst film of 1970. Matty P, did you see Madrone?
I haven't seen it.
That'll keep things short. There's no way Kelly's seen Madrone.
No.
Obviously, I can't really recommend it. We can move on from there. And this next one's kind of fun. Last year, we did something where we suggested thematically related double features with the films from 1959 and 2019. And it turned out to be rather successful. Several of you mentioned it to us on Instagram. So here we are again, going to recommend some double features of films from 1970 and 2020. You may have seen on Instagram that we also rewatched some of the films we studied from our 1990 project 5 years ago during the pandemic. So I may sneak in one of those films as well. The first one might be kind of obvious. It's a double feature featuring the mystery-solving family Enola Holmes and the Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, more Arthur Conan Doyle for Kelly. The obvious daddy double feature of The Father from 2020, and I Never Sang with My Father from 1970. The expose of the hypocrisy of men when it comes to relationship with women double feature, Promising Young Woman and Diary of a Mad Housewife. Double feature of Adventures in the West with a Strange Young Girl, News of the World, combined with Soldier Blue. And although obviously the Candice Bergen character in Soldier Blue is much older than Helena something, the young girl in News of the World, their trajectory as they go cross-country is kind of similar. The Unusual Pets double feature in Penguin Bloom from 2020 and Kess the Kenneth Loach Falcon movie from 1970, the melodramatic romance double feature of The Photograph from 2020, and what movie from 1970, Matty?
I don't know.
Love Story. Photograph and Love Story.
Photograph and Love Story. Still don't get it.
Well, you have to see The Photograph to know that it's a melodramatic love story, and therefore it goes well with Love Story.
Got it.
World War II action double feature, Greyhound from 2020, and of course, Tora 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 from 1970. Irish Love Stories, Wild Mountain Time with Emily Blunt from 2020, and of course, Ryan's Daughter from 1970. That's a Kelly special double feature. Double Crossing Heist Movies double feature, Guy Ritchie's The Gentleman from 2020, and Kill Them All and Come Back Alone, the spaghetti western from 1970, has a lot of similar plot elements going on there. A Modern Pregnancy Explorations double feature, and of course modern being to the time that they came out, for 2020, Never, Sometimes, Rarely, Always. And from 1970, what film is a modern pregnancy exploration, Matty?
Baby Maker.
The Baby Maker, correct. And using one of our 1990 movies, Living with Native Americans, A Man Called Horse, and Dances with Wolves would be a double feature because they're almost the same plot. White man living among the Native Americans.
What about Dances with Wolves, the other one that was the same plot in the 70s?
Little Big Man. I thought about Little Big Man. Is that where you're headed?
Yeah, the Forrest Gump.
Little Big Man and Forrest Gump would be a better double feature. And that wasn't one of our films, so I didn't go there. And Little Big Man is so different, such a satire. Like, it's so tonally different. Whereas Man Called Horse and Dances with Wolves are very much in lockstep with one another. And that brings us to another reason that you guys are all here. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the top 5 films of 1970, and Matt is going to join me in counting down our top 5 films from 1970, and Kelly's going to be very excited to hear what we have to say. Those of you who watch the show obviously have some idea of at least what our number 1s and number 2s are going to be. I know I have at least one surprise coming up for you guys, a film that did not come up on the show. When we did this on the show, we focused on the Oscar nominations and what should have, and the categories. That's how we broke it down. So now we get to just list our favorite films of the year. Are you excited?
I am.
All right, Kelly, you ready for the big countdown?
I've been waiting all night for it.
So is the audience, I think. So we're gonna break it down now. And if Matt doesn't change it too much, it's very possible we have the same number 1 film. So we'll see if that holds true, because it did in the 1970 show. But things might have changed. I have one reversal that I made. Matty P, your number 5 film of 1970.
My number 5 film from 1970 is Putney Swope.
Putney Swope, which you also said, as I recall, should have been nominated and won original screenplay.
Yeah, I thought it was really, really innovative and surprising, and I liked it a lot.
It is one of the most irreverent films I've ever seen, so it definitely gets points for that. It is innovative and creative, almost nihilistically so. It's got a lot going on. Because of the nature of the piece, it's a little all over the place. It's got a lot of things it's against, a lot of isms. Capitalism, it's obviously against racism and commercialism. It tries to cover a lot of ground. It's a great ride. It's absorbing, well-constructed, and only a handful of laughs. Like, I didn't laugh out loud. It was more like, that's kind of strange and interesting. But it's definitely a worthwhile film. Like, I definitely recommend people watch it.
Yeah.
Kelly, I'm going to presume you've not seen Putney Swope.
I've only heard about it.
It's not the best movie,
Yeah,
but it's one of the ones I enjoyed the most of this film that I watched.
That's fine. Here's a trivia question for Kelly. Do you know who directed Putney Swope?
I watched that part of the 1970 in review, but I do not remember.
Iron Man's father.
Oh, I remember this. I thought you were making it up, and I looked it up. It's Robert Downey Sr.
Yes, Robert Downey Sr. is the director of Putney Swope. Cool. Are you guys ready for my number 5 film?
Yes.
This is my reversal of sorts, because I said in the show that this was my number 4 film of the year, but I made a last-minute switch when preparing the script for tonight, realizing that I liked the next film a little bit better, but that doesn't take anything away from I Never Sang for My Father, which I guess on the show, Devin alerted me that I kept calling it I Never Sang with My Father as if they were a vaudeville act, so I apologized for that. In this film, it's the acting that makes all the difference. In other actors' hands, it could have come off as over-the-top, overwritten, or melodramatic. But Gene Hackman, Stell Parsons, and Melvin Douglas made the moments vital, real, and universally identifiable. The blocking from director Gil Cates and the accompanying camera work make this play adaptation, one of many that we saw in 1970, one of the more cinematic ones, even if it was contained spatially. The small little film speaks volumes about not only family, but masculinity, and especially in terms of the strange, complicated relationship between men and their emotions. The film also strikes a chord as relates to senior citizenry and the sad, in some cases, inescapable and inevitable realities that go hand in hand with aging, and what a hit to one's pride and ego that must be. There were a lot of films from 1970 that had a similar budget level and scope, but this one hits its bullseye in terms of emotional engagement and meaning. If I were a one-man Oscar nomination committee, I would give it 5 Oscar nominations. Best Picture, Best Actor for Hackman, not Douglas. Best Supporting Actress for Parsons. Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Editing, which helped make the contained piece feel a little more alive. I wouldn't have it win in any of those categories, but it would get 5 nominations. Matty, you saw I Never Sang for My Father.
Yes, for sure. It was great. I agree with everything you said.
Cool. Kelly, you may have seen the play at some point in your travels.
I actually haven't.
So I'm going to move on then. Kelly, tell Matt it's time for his number 4.
Hey, Matt. It's time for your number 4.
My number 4 film from 1970 is a reversal for me. I didn't love it at the time, but it's grown with me over the months or weeks or whatever. It's Patton.
That's an interesting one. Okay, why is it grown?
In particular, I was reminded of a quote. Somebody asks him, "Are those pearl-handed revolvers?" And he says, "Son, only a pimp in Louisiana whorehouse carries pearl-handed revolvers. These are ivory." And when I remembered that was in the movie, I was like, that's a pretty good movie. With that.
The line, put it over the top.
It was one of the first movies I think I saw, and it was like a big war movie, and there's so many war movies in a row, but it actually has like a pretty mild-tempered, it's very moody and atmospheric, and the acting is very strong compared to, say, like Tora, which is also a war movie. I was kind of clubbing them all together. With time, it spread apart, and it got some air in there. So it kind of rose up in the ranks for me.
I mean, we talked a lot about Patton won Best Picture and Best Actor and Best Director and Best Original Screenplay. I agree that it's a better film than Tora. That's the one you sort of compared it to. It tries to do some character work, but I mean, like, it almost feels disjointed. You know, it doesn't blend them well because it wants to be a character piece about Patton and it wants to be a plot piece about the history, about some of the accomplishments Patton made and some of the bullet point events. It was co-written by Coppola, who's doing the character stuff, and Edmund North, who is doing the history stuff. And I feel like they never quite gelled in the script. And as a result, I was never on the ride. The opening monologue is outstanding. I think it's a little uneven for me. Not a bad movie. If it wanted to be a character piece, I wonder if it needed to be as sprawling as it was. It's such a rich subject. I'm almost, I don't want to say offended, but disappointed it wasn't better. Given how strange and unique a character Patton is, I always call Patton the Lawrence of Arabia of American movies. Both films sort of deal with this narcissist in charge of a military power. And it could have been that good as Lawrence of Arabia, and it just wasn't for me. That's my Patton retort. Kelly, have you seen Patton?
I haven't, but I'm curious.
The fact that there was a big war element and then his personal story, and then do you need both and how do they gel? It's kind of like the personal story was more impactful because of who he was in the bigger picture. So my analogy I just came up with was, what if The Social Network wasn't about Facebook, but about some random little website that they made up for the movie? It matters how big of a deal it was in the big picture. And then so when something happens to it or when something reverses, it's more like an eyebrow raiser and an interesting twist that you didn't expect, or maybe it's more impactful in the history.
I don't want to say it didn't matter, but I mean, like, it almost was too ambitious because I just feel like it drowned under the weight of its own ambition.
Cool.
All right, Kelly, ready for my number 4?
I'm so ready.
I love that you're ready. So this one I swapped. Initially I had this at number 5, but now I have it at number 4 because, you know, I was working on the script. I realized I really like this film, and it came up quite a bit on the 1970 review, actually. Ladies and gentlemen, my number 4 is, if you can see that, it's The Liberation of L.B. Jones. One of a couple of major surprises. I shouldn't have been surprised because it's William Wyler, but it's a film I hadn't heard of before starting this project. I came to love it quite a bit. And I think in The Liberation of L.B. Jones, one finds an expert course in cinematic storytelling. Its ideas and styles and approach isn't new or different like something like MASH, but it's executed to perfection. On the 1970 review, I called out several of the fine performances in the film, including Lee J. Cobb, Roscoe Lee Brown, Lolo Falana, and my best supporting actor of 1970, Anthony Zerbe. And it's the scene work that sets the film apart. The way Wyler uses his camera to provide the actors the opportunities to communicate extreme nuance and detail. And he even adopts some of the en vogue styles of the period, like the zoom or handheld camera where appropriate, something he never would have attempted in the 40s, for example. He just adapts to whatever the beats of the scene call for, which is why I wanted him to be the best director of the year. In some ways, The Liberation of L.B. Jones is just as much of a call to arms as Mrs. Miniver, but for a very different war. The liberation of L.B. Jones is not so much the liberation from his wife or even his life, as much as it is the liberation from fear. theoretically, once you take fear out of the equation, you take away the power the oppressor has over you. I don't understand and can't speak to why this film isn't as big a part of Wyler's legacy as some of those other agreed upon classics, but what a masterful stroke on which to end a career. I think it's a magnificent achievement on a smaller scale and one of a handful of surprises of this project. If I were a one-man Oscar-nominating committee, I would give it 6 nominations. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor for Anthony Zerbe, Best Supporting Actress for Lola Falana, Best Adapted Screenplay, and once again, Best Editing. And I think it should have won in 2 categories, the aforementioned Best Director for William Wyler and Best Supporting Actor for Anthony Zerbe. 6 nominations and 2 wins for The Liberation of L.B. Jones. Matt, I believe you saw that film.
I did see it. It's great. Yeah, we talked about it on the show. I know you loved it. So, and I agree with what you're saying. It wasn't one of my favorites, but I don't disagree with anything you said.
Kelly, any chance you've seen The Liberation of L.B. Jones?
I just haven't.
That's totally cool. And an adorable way in which you said that, if I'm going to be honest. Ingratiate yourself to the audience even further.
I am a performer. I want their love.
You have their love. Matty P still on the fence, though. Matty P, your number 3 film of 1970.
Number 3 film of 1970 is Diary of a Mad Housewife.
Is that another jump? Because you had some negative things to say about it, both in the anti-picks and on the show in 1970. So
I know I'm not as consistent or well-researched as you are. However, I did enjoy watching it. I liked a lot of the characters in it. The actors are really good in it. I was kind of taken off guard by some of the scenarios and the dialogue. I liked it a lot.
I mean, I mostly liked it too. I thought it was a good film. I would probably hesitate to call it a great film. One big bump for me was your best actor of 1970, Richard Benjamin. I really struggled with him. I thought he was a little over the top and lacked nuance. I actually thought they both were. I think Frank Langella is a great actor. I just thought the male parts were written poorly. Some of the points that it was trying to make, I think, would have landed if there were a little more shading on both of those characters. I love the themes that it's trying to address, of the voiceless woman. That really landed. The set of expectations, of women in the generations prior to us are so shameful that it pains me to watch, even though I know it's true. She's not really permitted to have a voice or desire of her own. Which is frustrating, but I think important. It's ultimately a successful film with a handful of powerful moments, but also a handful of bumps for me, namely, the male characterizations, I think, is the biggest thing.
Makes sense because I did like the male performances, and so without those 2 big bumps, it might rise higher on your list.
Perhaps. We have if the 1970 review tells us anything, we have very different interpretations of performance. We look at
Alan McGraw, it's the best.
Oh my God. Oh, let's not start that again. Anyway, my number 3 is going to knock your guys' socks off in the sense that a couple of times on the 1970 show, I insinuated that there was a movie that I adored, but I was worried it wouldn't come up, and it didn't come up because it wasn't number 1 in any of the categories that we covered. I love the film, and it was my biggest surprise in the project, but I couldn't in good conscience say it was better than the top 2 films that I have coming up that I named on that show for should have won Best Picture or should have been nominated for Best Picture. This little film that blew me away stars 2 second-generation actors who had the majority of their success in their career on television. And I'm pleased to finally reveal the title of this film is the little remembered film Jenny, starring Marlo Thomas and Alan Alda, and directed by George Bloomfield. It's the kind of gem that makes these projects worthwhile to me. It's low budget for sure, but it has the spirit of those independent films that take advantage of their limitations and manage to strip artifice away to find truth and honesty. The grittiness of 1970 New York City, the claustrophobia of the on-location small spaces, the rough lighting and sound all contribute to the overall sense of verisimilitude. Yay! Verisimilitude, everybody. The key to the film is the scene work. For me, nearly 3/4 of the scenes in the film feature just Alda and Thomas, and both of them are extraordinary, albeit in very different ways. Bloomfield knows how to shoot each scene in just the right way, specific to those scenes. In some cases, holding on long shots that offer depth, with Jenny rooted in the center of the frame and Alda stalking the background, or in some cases, he'll hold tight on characters for long stretches so you get a sense of their inner life. The shots themselves offer insight into the moments, whether it's subtext or foreshadowing or social commentary. It's exactly the kind of thought that you want put into shot selection. Of course, you'd expect Alan Alda to be good. He's very good, and in spite of a lack of physical handicaps or monologues, he's just a regular guy in an extreme situation that he makes very real. Marlo Thomas is a different story altogether. The whole movie I watched it, I couldn't quite put my finger on her character. Is she overly sheltered or charmingly naive? Is she pathological? Is she crazy or just a little bit off? Or maybe just a dreamer? Regardless, I'll say this for her. She's impressively consistent in all of these choices that kept me on my toes with this character that I couldn't quite define, and I liked not being able to define her. I flirted with the idea of calling her the best actress of 1970 in a close call, but it's such a strange and unique characterization, I couldn't quite bring myself to go there. But I will say it's one of the most unique performances I've ever seen, and in that sense, one of the most memorable. Perhaps the best thing about the film is the storytelling. I had no idea the whole time of the trajectory the narrative was taking, and that's an increasingly rare phenomenon given how many movies I watch. It could have gone in a million different directions, and the one it chose still wound up surprising me and still being real. In many ways, it's the kind of film that I like to make, so I can appreciate the one that's so well executed on such a limited budget. If I were a one-man nominating committee, I would give it 5 nominations. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor for Alan Alda, Best Actress for Marlo Thomas, and Best Song for a song called Queen of Feeling. I wouldn't have it win in any of those categories, as you might imagine, because it didn't come up on the show, but I would give it 5 nominations. Matty P, it's an obscure little movie. I wonder if you got around to it. Jenny.
I didn't see it, but I want to now. It's a great recommendation.
Thanks. And I mean, it's if Kelly actually saw this one, I would be amazed.
I didn't.
This is the part where she was supposed to say, "It's my favorite movie of all time."
I love it. I looked it up. I thought maybe it would be like Heidi, but it's not.
It is nothing like Heidi. Moving right along, that's my number 3. Matty P. There's 3 potential films that can come in this slot if your 1970 in review was any indication. I wonder where you're going to go here. Your number 2 film in 1970, sir.
I wouldn't assume my past performance equals future potential in this thing, but Never Sang For My Father. It's my number 2.
Wow. All right. So we have some crossover. It was my number 5, your number 2. All right. So I don't need to say more about it.
The impression that it left with me was long lasting, and the characters were so strong, and the acting was so strong.
Acting that Matt and I agreed on. Who would have thunk?
And we talked about this on the show, but how the sister character and the brother character sort of were written and performed in such a way that perfectly balance each other out, very sort of pragmatic versus emotional, and sort of how they navigated the situation with their father. And it was a great movie.
All right, so we all know Kelly hasn't seen it. Most of you at this point probably know my number 2 film. We'll see what these guys remember from, because I did say it on the 1970 in review. So let's see. I'll give Kelly the first chance to guess. Do you know my number 2 film in 1970?
No, because I stopped after the Sherlock Holmes.
Matty P, do you know my number 2 film in 1970?
I want to guess, but I feel like it's going to be number 1, so I'd rather not guess.
So my number 2 film was the one I said that should have been nominated for Best Picture that was not. Ladies and gentlemen, David Lean's Ryan's Daughter is my number 2 film of 1970. We talked about it innumerably in the show, and everyone that I talk to that watches the show says it's the one film from the show that they want to go watch. I had forgotten about it a little bit, not remembering how I used to watch it over and over again when it was on heavy rotation on NYU TV in our dorms back in 1995. I made the comment in the show that the power of Lean lay in his ability to have films with an epic scope but focus on character. What's amazing to me is that as big as Ryan's Daughter feels, it never leaves the small Irish town in which it takes place. It's a small drama that takes place on a large canvas. It's less the story itself that interests me, although it's good, than what Lean extracts from it. He finds a story about sexual repression and the unnatural way it affects our lives. The way he bathes his lovers in nature spoke to this. I also think about the way the film attacks nationalism and the way we define our friends and allies by the arbitrary borders of our nations as opposed to those who show us kindness. And by extension of that, Lean shows us the danger of the mob mentality and its threat not only to individual thought, but also to compassion, decency, and justice. I think the film gets less attention because it's Lean's 5th or 6th best film. For a film that's supposed to be lesser Lean, I still find it to be moving, full, and thoroughly cinematic. I fell in love with it all over again. I knew what my number 1 film of 1970 was going to be before we started the project, but I actually thought twice about it. That's how much Ryan's Daughter meant to me upon viewing. For most of the year, I thought Jenny was going to be my number 2. In rewatching Ryan's Daughter, I couldn't, like I said, in good conscience, put Jenny over Ryan's Daughter because that's how cinematic it was. If I were a one-man nominating committee, it would get the most nominations of any film. 8 nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress for Sarah Miles, Best Supporting Actor for Trevor Howard, Best Original Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Production Design, Best Score. And in spite of 8 nominations, I actually have it 0 wins, but I have it coming in second place in a lot of those categories, including, obviously, Best Picture. Matt, you alluded earlier, you are down on Ryan's Daughter. You couldn't get through it again. You've never even finished it. I don't know if you have more you want to add. You obviously don't.
You might have unearthed the reason. Maybe in college they had it on such heavy rotation. I have like unsettled trauma from it being just burned. I don't know.
And for those of you who don't already know this, Matt and I went to college together, which is why he's making that reference. Kelly didn't know. See that?
Oh, I just remembered. I forgot.
You seem also almost unclear about why you didn't enjoy it.
From everything everyone says about it, I feel like I would enjoy it, but I just can't get through the first, I don't know, maybe 40 minutes in. And I've done it twice or 3 times now.
You do like other Lean, like Lawrence, Dr. Zhivago, right?
Well, I haven't seen those recently enough to give a good answer. I don't know.
Kelly, his films are long. I wonder where you land on David Lean.
I'm not sure I'm overly familiar.
Lawrence of Arabia, Dr. Zhivago.
Yeah, haven't seen him. Too long.
Bridge over River Kwai.
Oh wait, Bridge over River Kwai, I believe I've seen. This one, Ryan's Daughter, I'm really curious to watch it.
I mean, it's basically a reshaping of Madame Bovary. The story is melodrama like Madame Bovary, but it's cinematic melodrama, which fodder for JB. JB loves it. Was that the film you were going to guess, Matt, or you were going to guess what my number 1 is?
Now I can probably guess your number 1.
You were hoping that I would eliminate it for you and make it easy. You didn't want to be wrong. Now we're going to find out. Everyone knows what my number 1 is going to be probably. We'll see if Matt and I have the same one. Matt, after all this, and you said one thing on the show, so we'll see if it's different from what you said on the show. What is your number 1 film, 1970?
Number 1 film from 1970 is MASH.
It's still MASH! As I intimated it might be possible, MASH is also my number 1 film of 1970. It's my number 31 favorite film of all time. The style and tone are its primary draw, but in spite of all its humor, the sadness and cynicism hangs over the film. And given the world they, and quite frankly, we live in, it's understandable and identifiable cynicism. The carefree and casual worldview of Trapper and Hawkeye come from a certain sense of disgust and disillusionment. Their pranks and attacks on hypocrisy may seem childish, but they are also an escape from all the darkness around them. One could say the same thing about the film itself. Its boldness of style, its wealth of themes, and its ability to be highly entertaining makes it, to me, the best film of 1970 and an all-time favorite. If I were a one-man nominating committee, I would give it 3 nominations: Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Sound, but it would win Best Picture and Best Sound. It's only 3 nominations that I don't have in the acting categories, but I have it winning, the big ones, or the big one, and also Best Sound. So, Matty, we share the same number 1 film. Doesn't happen that often. It happened in 1988 with us. Anything you'd like to add to what I said?
No, I like your Best Sound category, though, because I agree. Robert Altman often plays with sound a lot in a really fun way. Most of the surrounding dialogue. I just watched The Player like a week or 2 ago, and there's an incredible amount of overlap, just like in most of his movies. It sort of has basically everybody talking at once, and at any given moment, you're just deciding who you should be paying attention to, which is really cool.
But also the soundscape, the use of the announcements, and
oh yeah,
it's the whole world is defined for you of the camp.
Yeah, for sure. It's great. So yeah. Excellent.
And also a reminder for the audience that Matt Polis is a sound designer by trade, so that's why he called out the sound there. Kelly, it's possible you've seen MASH?
So, no, but I'm wondering, and please forgive me, is the TV show based on it?
Yes, the TV show is based on it. And it has all the same character names, added some new ones, but it is very different tonally. In fact, Robert Altman hates the TV show. He actually used the word despise in the MASH commentary. He said he despised it. The use of a laugh track is a big part of that. There's no laugh track in the movie, obviously. And the movie is significantly more irreverent and significantly more satirical. Wouldn't you say, Matt?
Yeah, I'm not overly familiar with the show. It was on when I was a kid, and I watched it occasionally, but I don't know it very well.
I would say,
the same cast too, right?
No, one cast member, Radar, the little short guy with glasses, Gary Burkhardt.
I guess I'm thinking, but I guess, like you said, the character names are dissimilar, and I just made the incorrect association.
But the guy who played Hawkeye, the Donald Sutherland film, was Alan Alda, who was in Jenny in 1970 and the Moonshine War in 1970. Full circle again. That's kind of fun. All right, guys, the evening is over. It is time to wrap things up. Are you guys good to wrap things up? Everybody happy?
Yeah.
It's time for an evening summary. Kelly, you're going to start us off. What did you think about the evening? You were just chilling tonight.
I was just chilling. I felt underprepared, and I feel like I learned a lot. And I'm excited to watch a bunch of these new movies.
Name the first thing that you learned tonight that you're going to go research or go watch.
MASH.
You got to see MASH. Matty, evening summary. What did you think?
Because of your review, Jonathan, I'm excited to go watch Jenny.
Yeah, I hope you like it. It feels like one of the better student films in terms of its scope. It's very raw style, but it really touched me emotionally, and it's very unique. I thought it was really a special surprise, one that's going to stick with me for a long time. So I hope you enjoy it, and you'll come back in the show sometime and tell us about it. We're going to kick off our 66 series of episodes with the next current feature, hopefully by August 19th, 2021, in which we're going to review the Ryan Reynolds film Free Guy. That's coming up hopefully in a month or so here in the No Name Cinema Society. Stay tuned on Instagram to find out more about it. Kelly and Matty P say goodnight to the audience.
Good night. Thank you.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I can now declare this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.